I'm gonna start off with a question. Where are camels originally from? The Middle East? No. Central Asia, maybe? No. The correct answer is actually Canada. That's right, the icon of the desert traces its origins to what is now the Canadian Arctic territories. The Yukon, giant camels, along with other species which roam what is now the Yukon Territory in Alaska, with humps to store fat reserves during the harshest winters, as well as large hooves for walking across the snow, once crossed the land bridge into Siberia. These early camels would not realize that their builds would be excellent for the opposite of the extreme winters that they lived in. The deserts of the Old World would become their new home. Moving away from the boreal forests of what are now Russia to the desert steppes of Mongolia resulted in two-humped Bactrian camels, and eventually many of these creatures would spread into the sand dunes of Arabia and the Sahara, resulting in the one-humped dromedary camel. Now, that doesn't mean that all the camels migrated through the land bridge into the Old World. Another group of these camels would move southward into the Andes of South America, resulting in the vicuña, the alpaca, and most famously, the llama. The llama and the camel, these two long-lost cousins, would shape the Old World and the New World. This is a story of how these two relatives would respectively shape not only their own paths but the paths of human history. Early camels were creatures from the Americas, which invaded the Old World of Afro-Eurasia. Humans, on the other hand, were Old World creatures, native to Africa, that invaded the New World through a land bridge. Same path the camels took, just in the reverse direction. And when they crossed paths in the camels' native homeland, it didn't come to a surprise as they took a liking to these creatures. In fact, they took a liking too much by hunting them and eating them. As a result, their populations declined, most likely due to hunting by humans. These human ancestors were the ancestors of the Native Americans. The camels, which escaped to the Old World, would get a far better deal, forming a certain close set of relationships with the bipedal apes. The one-hump variety in what is now the Middle East was domesticated as far back as 6,000 years ago, and camels, by and large, are still domesticated in this region continuously to this day, to the point that there aren't too many wild populations. It probably happened again as far back as 6,000 years ago, which makes the domestication relatively recent compared to chickens, pigs, and most of all dogs. On top of that, some of the earliest civilizations were in the Middle East. Camels would be great for surviving high temperatures, storing fat during times of scarcity, and could move long distances without frequently drinking water. This made them essential for various nomadic desert-dwelling peoples to be used as beasts of burden, transportation, meat, milk, clothing, and leather. To these desert dwellers, life was impossible without the camel. It would not be until another couple thousand years in which camels would be utilized for the military, at least on a mass scale. The earliest written accounts of the camels in warfare date back to ancient Assyria, when they clashed with early Arab tribes mounted on camels. At the time, the Arabs were a relatively primitive set of tribal groups on the fringes of Mesopotamia and were not unified. Little did the urban-dwelling Mesopotamians know at the time, but the Arabs, with the help of their camels, would one day become their successor civilization. The relationship between Arab Bedouins and their camels is one of central to their history, far more so than it is to the ancient Mesopotamians, for without them, Arab civilization would probably not exist to any significant degree. And by and large, the camel has become an icon of this region around the world. Both the Persians and the Romans, as well as the Roman successors, the Byzantines of the East, used camels in warfare to fight each other in the desert. Both of them would eventually be crushed by a massive wave of camel-backed Arabian cavalry. This was particularly embarrassing since the Arabs were seen as being backward, yet they crushed far more supposedly advanced civilizations. These Arabs weren't just an ethnic group, but the bringers of a message, and that message was Islam. The combination of the horse and camel cavalry helped Prophet Muhammad, as well as the Rashiduns, his successors, along with other successors afterwards, such as the Umayyad Caliphates, to conquer wide swaths of land, crushing weaker states. While Islam is one of the most human-centered religions in the world, it does place a great deal of importance on the camel in times of both peace and warfare, and are widely respected. The Prophet Muhammad had a particular liking for camels. They are also considered halal, meaning that you can eat them under Islamic dietary restrictions, and this was important given the desperation of desert life. A notion that, while sad, for vegans does make sense. The mass utility of these creatures helped spread Islam into becoming what is now the second largest religion in the world. Another species of camel that would change the world in its own way, although to a lesser degree, were the Central Asian two-humped Bactrian camels. These were camels that moved caravans across much of the Silk Road. They occasionally were rode as a status symbol, but were not utilized for mass military purposes due to their smaller size. The Mongols, after all, preferred their horses. They were spared the deaths on the battlefield, unlike those horses and their one-humped counterparts, mostly moving pack goods along trade routes throughout the deserts and grasslands. On the other side of the world, their family overseas, the llamas and alpacas, would seek refuge along the Rocky Mountains of the South American Andes in what is now Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, and Chile. Human populations would move southwards as well, eventually domesticated the llama for meat, as well as for wool, which was used to provide warmth in the cool alpine climates. They also served as pack animals to carry goods across the tough mountain terrain. In many ways, the llama played as a functional role in Andean civilization, similar to what the camel played in various Middle Eastern civilizations. Llamas fed, clothed, and provided a network of logistics and goods for transportation for the massive Incan Empire, which stretched across much of the mountain ranges, along with deserts and even jungles. This was quite impressive for a state that did not have wheels or a written language. However, if you had to pick between the camel or the llama, you really would just have to pick the camel. Llamas are much weaker than camels and can't carry the same load. Alpacas are even smaller. This limited the amount of goods and people that could move around at a period of time, which had resulted in many of these New World peoples being fairly, for lack of a better word, backward compared to the Old World. Cavalry was also out of the question, as llamas can't carry an adult human on their backs. When the Spanish arrived, their horses were very useful for conquering the Incan Empire. Incan soldiers didn't know how to react to cavalry, and instead of holding their ground, as they should have, they fled, and eventually got mowed down by the horsemen. The Spanish brought horses for riding along with mules and donkeys, which proved to be stronger, replacing the llamas. However, keeping close to their culture, Andean people have continued to raise llamas, being replaced by old world pack animals and later by actual automobiles. Llamas, by and large, were mostly used in the most remote, poorest areas of the Andes. They also are still used for meat to this day, and most of all wool, as llama and alpaca wool is much better quality than that of most sheep wool. While modernity has rendered llamas to be glorified sheep in the New World, camels would still be utilized in the modern world of warfare. Various Middle Eastern, Indian, and European colonial militaries put them to use on arid battlefields. Their use for transportation before the mass production of four-wheel drive automobiles pushed the British to import them to Australia, which they were never native to. These camels carried loads across the Australian desert environment, but were eventually abandoned and replaced by engines. To this day, Australia has a massive feral camel population that wreaks havoc on the environment, oftentimes by eating certain types of shrubs and not having any natural predators. On a positive note, their most iconic role in modern warfare was during the Arab Revolt against the German-backed Ottoman Turks during World War I. This is the story of Lawrence of Arabia. With the help of camel cavalry, the Bedouin tribes would push back the Ottoman Turkish soldiers, leading to the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in part, as well as the coming European colonization of Arabia after the war. However, today, camels mostly play a ceremonial role in various militaries in the Middle East, North Africa, and the Indian subcontinent. To this day, camels are used less for their essential roles and more for racing and secondary milk production. Camel milk is lower in fat and higher in vitamins. However, due to lower yields per animal and smaller economies of scale, camel milk is pretty expensive and not widely used outside of nomadic people groups. A typical grocery store in the Middle East will have far more cow milk available than camel milk, as well as far more beef, lamb, and chicken than camel meat. Furthermore, much to my own disappointment, the dish composed of a camel, stuffed with a goat, stuffed with a sheep, stuffed with a chicken, is, for the most part, an urban legend and not a particularly popular widespread custom in the Middle East. Looking back at all of this, both llamas and camels were creatures that were utilized by humans, but then replaced with other animals such as the horse and donkey, and then later by camels and sheep. And then those animals in turn were replaced by machinery. While the influence of both of these creatures has been crested, it still lives on, not only in the lives of their biological descendants, but in how they've shaped our historical journey. Thanks for watching.